Hi guys, it's Mrs. Williams, and today we're going to learn about solving 1 and 2-step equations. So before we get started, make sure you have your notes ready, that you're fit, and you have checked your tech. Okay, everybody ready? Here we go. Now before we actually solve an equation, I want to ask you a question. What are inverse operations? Well, inverse operations are opposite operations that undo each other. For instance, what's the inverse of addition? What's the inverse of multiplication? That's division. And the inverse of squaring would be taking the square root. Now, likewise, what's the inverse of subtraction? It's addition. What's the inverse of division? It's multiplication. And what's the inverse of a square root? That would be squaring. They undo each other. If you add 2 and then you subtract 2, you have basically done nothing. It's like turning on the lights and turning off the lights. You're still in the dark. Okay? So when we solve equations, we use inverse operations. Not only that, what we do is we use the opposite or the inverse, the opposite operations in the opposite order. So the reason I changed inverse to opposite is just so you have all those O words, because you kind of remember it when it's a whole bunch of O words. So we use the opposite operations in the opposite order. Now let me show you what I'm talking about. So here's an example. We're going to solve x plus 5x plus 2 equals 20. Now the first step is to combine like terms if we have any. And notice in this problem, we have x plus 5x. So what we really have is 6x plus 2 equals 20. Now, what operations are being done to the variable? What I'm asking is, if I asked you to plug a number in for x, say I asked you to plug in 10 for x, what would you do to the 10? The first thing you would do is you would multiply by 6, and then you would add 2, right? Because here's the x, and you're going to multiply by 6, and then you would add 2. So those are the operations that we do. Now we want to do the opposite operations in the opposite order. So we're going to work backwards. What's the opposite of adding 2? That's subtracting 2. What's the opposite of multiplying by 6? That's dividing by 6. So when we go to solve, we're going to take this equation, 6x plus 2 equals 20, and we're going to do the opposite operations in the opposite order. So we're going to do this minus 2 first. But whatever, and I can do anything I want to one side of an equation as long as I do it to the other side of the equation. So I'm going to subtract 2 over here. When I do that, I'm going to get 6x, and 2 minus 2 is 0. 20 minus 2 is 18. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do that next opposite operation in the opposite order, which is divide by 6. So I'm going to divide both sides by 6. And when I do that, 6x divided by 6, those 6's cancel out, and I just get x. And 18 divided by 6 is 3. And lo and behold, we have our answer, x equals 3. So if you look at what we did, first thing we did was combine any like terms. Then we looked and we said, all right, if I was going to be plugging something in for x, I would first multiply by 6, then add 2. We figured out the opposite operations in the opposite order. Subtract 2, divide by 6. And that's what we did to both sides of the equation. First, we subtracted the 2, then we divided by 6, and that gave us our solution. Let's try another one. So here's one. We're going to solve x divided by 7 minus 3 equals 19. So the first step is to combine like terms. Notice it says if there are any, and guess what? There are none in this problem, so we don't have to do this first step. Okay, now what are the operations that are being done? So if I was going to plug a number in for x, what would I do to it? First thing is I would divide by 7. Then it would be subtract the 3. So now we're going to do the opposite operations in the opposite order. What's the opposite of adding 3? Oh, subtracting 3? That's adding 3. What's the opposite of dividing by 7? That's multiplying by 7. So here we go. I'm going to rewrite the equation so that it's down here. X over 7 minus 3 equals 19. Well, we're going to add 3 to both sides. And that's going to give us x over 7. And the 3's are going to add to 0. And 19 plus 3 is 22. Okay. Now we're supposed to multiply both sides by 7. The 7's will cancel out. And we're going to have x. And then we have 22 times 7. And if you need your calculator, it's okay. That's 154. And we have actually found our solution. X is 154. And you can always go back to the original problem and plug it in. What's 154 divided by 7 and then subtract 3? You should get 19. So let's solve equations using the distributive property notes. Well, before we can use the distributive property, let's make sure we know what the distributive property is. That would be saying something like the quantity A times the quantity B plus C. That's when we distribute and say A times B is AB plus A times C is AC. We distribute the multiplication over the addition. Okay, so does everybody remember that? All right, so when we're given an equation such as 2b plus 5 times the quantity b minus 6 equals negative 9. First off, notice we're not solving for x this time, we're solving for the variable b. Notice second that there are parentheses. If you see parentheses, you're going to distribute. So we're going to distribute this 5 into the parentheses. So the 2b comes along, and then 5 times b is 5b. And 5 times negative 6 is negative 30. Then we copy the rest of the equation equals negative 9. Now we have to combine like terms, okay? We have 2b's plus 5b's. That tells us we have 7b's minus 30 equals negative 9. Okay, so now we're going to think about what's happening to our variable b. If we were substituting a number in for b, what would we do to the number? First, we would multiply by 7, then we would subtract 30. Now, in order to solve, we have to do the opposite operations in the opposite order. So the opposite of subtracting 30 is adding 30, and the opposite of multiplying by 7 is dividing by 7. So I'm going to bring my equation back down here. Whoops, where'd it go? 7b minus 30 equals negative 9. This way we have it to work with. And if we do the opposite operations in the opposite order, we add 30 to both sides. And here they're going to add to 0. We'll be left with 7b on the left-hand side, and the negative 30 and the 30 added to 0. But negative 9 plus 30 is positive 21. Now the next thing we're supposed to do, after we do the add 30, we're supposed to divide by 7. So we divide both sides by 7. And the 7b divided by 7, the b's cancel out. The 7's cancel out, and we have b. Then we have 21 divided by 7 is 3. So our final answer is b equals 3. And there you go. So it's the same as what we were doing yesterday, only we're adding one step at the beginning. where we have to distribute if we see parentheses. Okay, so we put one more step at the top. If there's parentheses, we're going to distribute. Okay, guys, so that's it for solving equations using the distributive property. So don't forget to write your quick little summary, formulate a question for me, and then answer your post-video Google summary. All right, guys, see you next class.